Yeah.
What was it about?
Well, that wasn't it. They were there. I can't quite remember. Was the complaining about him healing on the Sabbath or something like that? Or okay, remind me.
So basically, what Jesus says is, he said, "Your father Abraham rejoiced my days of coming as the Messiah." So the Jews, they asked Jesus, "You're hardly 50 years old. How do you know this?" So Jesus said, "Before Abraham was, I am."
That's it.
That is the context.
That's it.
Now, obviously, as a Christian, you will say, "I am" is a divine title, right?
Yeah, well,
and
that's
you
what we
get this,
say.
and you
That's
get
what we
this,
say.
and you get this from Exodus chapter 3, verse 14.
Impressive.
I've read the Bible.
Yeah.
So I went through the Christian school system. So I know.
Very good.
Yeah,
Well, I read the Quran, but you know the Bible much better than I know the Quran.
But in Greek, do you know what is the Greek for "I am"?
Ego eimi.
Ego eimi. If you read in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, the Greek Septuagint, how does it read?
Yes. Well, of course, the Greek Septuagint is a translation of the Hebrew.
Yes.
So, yeah.
200 years before Jesus. Yeah.
Tell me what.
It's ego eimi ho on.
Okay.
It means I am the being.
Oh well, yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So that is the proper context.
Yeah,
So
sure,
and
we recognise that.
you recognise that, right?
Yeah,
So therefore, I am is not the title.
Well-
The being is the title.
Well. I mean, I think I'm right in saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it could be I am who I am, or I will be who I will be.
That's not the correct
or-
translation. Because if you read
or
in
being,
Hebrew,
or being.
if you read in
you could translate all of those ways.
that's not the correct translation. Because if you go back
I've
to
been
the
mistaught there, but the Greek,
Don't worry.
the Greek guys who
We're-
told
we're
me
learning it.
say it could be I am who I am,
Because
or
it-
I could be who I be, or being.
because the Hebrew word, because the Hebrew passage here is ehya esher ehye.
Yeah.
I am the ever living,
Yeah. Okay.
not I am who I am. Okay?
Well.
Yeah. So if you read the Greek Septuagint, it's ego eimi ho on. I am the being. First of all, that's the
Well,
proof that.
we would
Secondly,
disagree with that. We would disagree with that.
secondly, if you read in John chapter 9 verse 9, the blind man, he even said, "I am." Exactly the same construct.
Yeah.
Right? I can bring it up for you. I can bring it up. You believe me? Are you sure?
Yeah.
I'm not making stuff
I'm
up.
not blind. No,
Yeah, as a Muslim, I cannot lie.
believe you.
Okay?
Yeah.
So if you read in John chapter 9, verse 9, even the blind man used exactly the same construct. Yeah, I forgot the beginning, but he says at the end, "I am." But what did the translators do? They put a bracket saying, "I am the man." Why didn't they do the same for Jesus in John 8, verse 58?
Yeah, but the difference is.
Wait. The correct translation should be, "I am the Messiah who's been spoken of." That is the context.
The difference is, no one tried to stone the man born blind, but the Jews were regularly trying to kill Jesus.
Do you know why?
For blasphemy.
Do you know why?
For blasphemy.
They don't believe he's the Messiah.
Well,
That's why.
No. They're not the Messiah they wanted. They did send.
Yeah, but Jesus did not.
argument.
But the thing is, Jesus never claimed here that he is God, because he didn't say that I saw Abraham. He never said that. He said Abraham rejoiced my days of coming as the Messiah. So now the Jews, they said, "Well, you're hardly 50 years old." So Jesus then said, "Before Abraham was, I am." Now what?
Understand that to be.
Right. What? So therefore, this is the problem consistency. When you read in John chapter 9 verse 9, the blind man used exactly the same construct.
Oh, yeah, but they don't try and kill the blind man, do they?
No, that's not the point. The point is, why is it? The point is, there's a lack of consistency, because "I am" is an incomplete statement. I am here, meaning I am the man. If you read in John chapter 8 verse 58, why didn't they do the same? Why didn't they give the context after saying "I am"? So therefore, the correct translation should be, "Before Abraham was, I am the Messiah that was spoken about."
Okay, that's what.
And that's why the Jews find the Christians blasphemous. They don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. In fact,
That's true.
I don't know if you read
Apart
John's
from
Gospel.
apart from the
I don't know if you read John's Gospel.
I have.
Were the Jews, were they sure of who Jesus was?
Well, I would say virtually no one was sure who Jesus was until after his resurrection.
No, before that.
No, I would say no, even the disciples.
Even
Yeah.
the disciples deserted Jesus.
Yeah, that's
Why?
right, that's right,
Because
yeah.
they say that the words of Jesus are so esoteric. It's so
Well,
unclear.
it's because it was not the Messiah that they were hoping for and expecting.
Of course.
Yeah.
So therefore, that's the lack of
that's
consistency.
why. I mean, I guess you guys may know. That's why, even to this day, at the Passover, which must be happening around this sort of time.
Yeah.
Jews still set a empty chair, don't they, at their Passover festival, and the eldest man or the eldest son in the house goes to the door to see if Elijah's there, because they're still expecting their Messiah.
Simon Paul, are you doing good? He's better to speak to. I'm poor when it comes to Christianity. He's very good. He's very good. But what I'm trying to say is that, look, what I tend to find with Christians always try and find the ambiguous statements when it comes to the divinity of Jesus. But the Christians never ever looks at the most clearest statement that Jesus made. If you read in John chapter 17 verse 3, it says, "This is life eternal, that they may know you, the Father, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent." So who is the only true God according to Jesus?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's fair enough, but we would, I mean, our counter to that would be the context of John as a whole. And we may be wrong. I mean, fair enough, I hear what you're saying, and I do, I mean, you are causing me to, think and reevaluate, so fair income. But I mean, when you have this, famous "I am" sayings, when say, "I am the way, the truth."
It's only John's Gospel. You wouldn't find that in the synoptic
No,
Gospel.
that is true, but we would say, what Jesus says in John 17 has to be taken in the context of John as a whole.
I know the context.
And we may be wrong.
Father, the hour has come. Glorify me as a glorified. So I know the context. If you believe, if you believe that I'm misquoting.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm just saying. I mean, you're making a fair point.
Do you know what Saint Augustus did with this passage? Because that contradicts the concept of Trinity. What he did is he actually changed the order. So he included the only true God with the Son. Why did he do that?
Well, we would say that statement has to be included in the context of John.
But that's not what it's saying in the Greek. So what Saint Augustus did, he translated in Latin and he changed the order. Yeah. And he changed it.
Yeah.
Why did he have to do that?
Well, I think I'm right in saying that the current English translations is not from the Latin, they're from the Greek.
Yeah. And if you read all the versions,
Yeah.
it's very consistent. The only true God, because I've got the NRSV, I've got the KJV, I've got the NIV, right? I've got the KJV. All of them say the only true God is the Father.
I hear what you're saying, but we would say you have to read that in the context of John as a whole.
Then give me the context.
And
Go ahead.
And the context of John as a whole.
He's better to speak to. He's more proficient in this field.
We may be wrong on this, but even if we are, and we go back to my kind of original point, even if we are completely wrong about this, would you concede that the Christian concept of God? I've only gone to the first bit.
I know you're going back to the same point, but I don't believe that God. If you say Jesus,
By the way, my name is Paul. I'm a Muslim as well, with these brothers.
Alhamdulillah.
I think I may have met you many years ago. You lost a lot of weight. You're looking very
Alhamdulillah.
trim.
MashaAllah.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, may Allah
Not
bless.
because of illness. If people are saying, "Are you ill?" No, I'm not ill.
Alhamdulillah.
You look as though you've been on diet since I
Yeah.
It's fine.
So I'm coming from the same faith position as these brothers. So I used to be a Christian though. One of the things I discovered when I was studying John's Gospel, and these I am statements. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Find it and then I'll come.
Before Abraham was I am. I am the reresurrection of the life. As his brother has said, they're only found in one Gospel, the Gospel of John.
That is true.
And biblical scholars, who are overwhelmingly Christian, have come to the conclusion in the last 150 years, 99% of them, that the historical Jesus is to be found in the earlier Gospels, and the earliest Jewish tradition. For example, in Mark and Q, where Jesus never says any of these things.
No, that's true.
And so the idea is that John represents a much more theologically developed portrait of Jesus, where the beliefs about Jesus being the light of the world, the beliefs about him being the resurrection life, have been put on the lips of Jesus. But he didn't actually say those words. But
if I may interject,
please.
So when do you think? When's your understanding when sort of John was written? Do you think?
Well, again, I'm not a scholar, so I'll tell you what the scholars in general are saying towards the end of the first century of John, and it's usually
in the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. We're saying. So we think. Would you agree that we think Mark is around 50, 60,
I wouldn't say,
and that John was around 90?
Yeah, but the dating is not really the issue for biblical scholars so much as if Jesus of Nazareth actually walked around Galilee, downtown Judea, wherever, saying, "I am the light of the world, I am the resurrection of the life," how come no one ever reports him doing this in Matthew, in Luke, in Mark, in Q, in any of the earliest Jewish tradition. Luke, by the way, says at the beginning of his gospel, "Dear Theophilus, I'm writing an orderly, accurate account of all that's happened amongst you, so you may know the truth about who Jesus was." He has Jesus never saying any of this. Only in the very latest gospel, the last one to be written, suddenly you get Jesus making these extraordinary public statements, as if everyone heard them. So scholars, 99%, and by the way, this is a statement I'm paraphrasing from a scholar, 99% of biblical scholars in the last 150 years have concluded that the historical Jesus, the Jesus of history, is not to be found in John's Gospel, as in the earlier Gospels. So this argument about the context of John and John 17 verse 3 and all that is very interesting, but ultimately, if you want to know who the real Jesus was, it's irrelevant. Because very, very likely he didn't go around saying this anyway. This is a later Christian addition, a fiction basically added to the Jesus tradition. It's a distortion of who Jesus really was. Now, these are the conclusions, by the way, of overwhelmingly Christian scholars. And I can name names like Jimmy Dunn, Graham Stanton, etc., etc., etc. People I've read, many of whom I've interviewed, from Oxford and Cambridge, John Barton, for example, and others. This is what they all say. And many of these are priests in the Church of England. They're ordained ministers.
The reason why I didn't bring this up, that's a fantastic point that you made.
I notice you laugh when I say that, but you see, these are pious men who believe in Jesus, who believe in God, who care about the truth, and laughing at them is not really.
Well, I wasn't laughing at them in particular. I was laughing at bishops who are in favour of same-sex marriages.
I was talking about.
Oh, I'm not laughing at them.
Scholars,
I'm not laughing at them.
Scholars who take their faith and their Bible and Jesus seriously.
Don't misunderstand.
They're not atheists.
I'm not laughing at them.
Okay, good. So Bart Ehrman is an exception. He's an atheist.
And in
now,
fact,
but nevertheless, he agrees with them. He agrees with them.
Exactly.
Even though he's not a Christian, he agrees with these Christian scholars that the historical Jesus is not found so much in John.
I mean, I would counter-argue
Absolutely,
that
100%.
all the Gospels were written during the reason they were written is because people were dying off, and therefore they were all written during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses, and therefore Christianity wouldn't have got off the ground if the Gospel writers, whoever they were, misrepresented the works and works of Jesus Christ. It would have just got nowhere. So if they were sort of misquoting, if they're making stuff up, if they're saying, Jesus, turned himself into a ball of fire and, looped the top of the temple 7 times, and everyone would say, well, hang on, this is rubbish. We were there, we never saw this. Christianity wouldn't get anywhere if that were the case. It was one of the strengths of Christianity is based on the fact that they were all appealing to objective truth that everyone agreed with. They just agreed with where Jesus got his power from. They would say he was either mad or demonic or something like that, but no one would disagree, what he actually did and what he said. But going back to, the earlier Gospels, let's say Mark. Would you agree Mark is probably the earliest? Maybe written around...
Again, it's not so much I'm not a scholar, so what I'm trying to do here is to represent what the broad mainstream of scholars who teach at places like Oxford and Cambridge and Yale and Harvard and so on. What are they saying? And most of these are Christian, and they would say that John's Jesus is heavily fictionalized.
Correct.
And now Christians say this, Christian experts say this. Now, the point about the Gospels is, and this is again a commonplace, they're not like modern biographies. If I was writing a modern biography of Winston Churchill, and I made up statements and put them in Winston Churchill's mouth in the House of Commons in 1941, for example, I would be trashed in the critical reviews. But ancient biographies are not like that. And the danger is we commit anachronism. We read back our modern understanding of biographies back into the 1st century, and that's a basic mistake.
Well, we wouldn't spend if we were writing a biography of Winston Churchill. We wouldn't spend over half of or a third of the time on his death, would we? So
the point is, what are the Gospels? What is the genre of the Gospel?
Well, it's a new genre, right? It's a fresh genre.
Well, what many scholars, or most scholars would say, I can quote scholars if you want, but the consensus seems to be that the Gospels are faith documents. They're written from Christian faith. They're not so much concerned with historical accuracy. And we know this because in Matthew, for example, an earlier Gospel, he makes stuff up occasionally. For example,
absolutely.
The famous zombie apocalypse, as it's called.
I'm misquoting the Old Testament.
When Jesus literally dies, and at the very moment you get big numbers of people coming out of their tombs, walking around, going back to their families in broad daylight, and presumably living happily ever after. This extraordinary miraculous event is attested by precisely no one else in history. Josephus the Jewish historian from Israel at that time fails to mention it. Neither does Luke mention it, or John, or the book of Acts, the history. This would be the most fantastic evangelistic, missionary propaganda if it happened, and no one else knows about it. And virtually every scholar I've ever read on this thinks it's a legend. But Matthew tells us it happened.
Yeah.
So we can't always take the Gospels as history. Sometimes they make stuff up. And Matthew changes the words of Jesus in Mark, and I can give you examples. For example,
I know
in the
you say
earlier
that.
Gospel in Mark, because Jesus denies he is good, denies he is God.
Everything you say against Christianity is true.
A man comes to Jesus and says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?"
That's it.
Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? There is no one good but God alone."
Mark
That's a
10:18.
verbatim quote from the New Revised Standard Version. If you look at Matthew, who used Mark according to the standard model, he changes Jesus' words. So a man comes to Jesus, I'm repeating what Matthew says. A man comes to Jesus and says, "Good teacher."
They're using the material differently, sure.
A man comes to, yes, but how do they use it differently, and why do they use it? This is the key thing. In Matthew's version, a man comes to say, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus says, "Why do you ask me about what is good? If you want to enter into life, obey the commandments." Now, why does Matthew change Jesus' word? According to many scholars, including Trinitarian Christians like Jimmy Dunn, the professor at Durham University. Yeah, I know you believe in Trinity, but our friend here, Nazem, met him a couple of years ago. He's sadly dead now. Not Nazem, but Jimmy Dunn.
Yeah.
So, do you believe in the Trinity? He said, "Yes, I believe in the Trinity." So he's a believing preacher, but top biblical scholar. He says in one of his works, the Christology in the Making, I recommend it if you've not read it, that Matthew was obviously embarrassed by Jesus' denial in Mark that he was God. So Matthew, that's the word he used, embarrassed. Now, John Barton, professor of the Bible at Oxford, who had the privilege of interviewing on my channel, Blogging Theology, he said that Matthew was being dishonest in changing. Now, John Barton is an ordained minister in the church that you laughed about earlier on, the Church of England. You see, but he's an ordained minister.
I was only laughing about those who deny the authority of the Scripture.
So he doesn't deny the authority of Scripture. So John Barton also said that Matthew has been, you can watch the words on my channel, that Matthew has been dishonest in changing the words of Jesus. Now, why would Matthew change the words of Jesus? Because in the last part of the first century, when Matthew was writing his gospel, so the idea runs, beliefs about Jesus had risen, he'd been elevated and exalted to a very high status in the minds of Christians at the end of the first century. So Matthew, reflecting the beliefs of his community, changes the words of Jesus to make them conform to later beliefs. But the original saying of Jesus doesn't have that. So here we have an example of Christian corruption of the Injil.
You say that because I've never heard, I mean that's a fresh line to me, but I've never heard that when Jesus says there's no one good but God alone, he's denying his divinity.
I've heard that in many, if you read a lot of commentaries on Mark chapter 10, and I've read a lot of them, talk to the scholars, which I've done, some of them, they agree with this, that this is a commonplace in academic Christian scholarship.
Isn't he saying? Well, that's new to me. But I'm not saying.
Well, there you are then.
I'm not saying.
Today you have learned today what your own scholars are saying about your own Gospels. Your own scholars are saying this. I'm not saying this. Your own scholars are saying this.
Okay, fair enough. But other scholars or other preachers and scholars I've read suggest that it's nothing to do with.
Which other scholars might these be? Could you name any of your names?
Well,
for example, can you give me a name?
I suppose John Stott.
John Stott is not a biblical scholar.
Well,
he's a preacher.
Well,
and he's been dead for 30 years. But that's not the point. Yeah. But he's not a biblical scholar. He writes popular commentaries as a preacher.
Well, okay, he's a commentator.
But I'm talking about biblical scholars, specialist historians in the field.
N.T. Wright?
N.T. Wright, yeah, he is one.
Okay.
What does he say about this passage?
Well, if I understand these guys correctly...
N.T. Wright he does qualify. He is one of...
Okay.
By the way, he's a member of the church you laughed about. He's a Church of England bishop.
Well,
he's a bishop in the church you laughed about.
Don't misunderstand. Don't misunderstand.
I'm sorry, I'm being naughty.
You're being naughty because you know.
I am being naughty. But he is a bishop in that church.
Okay. Yes,
he is. The Bishop of Durham, no less.
Well, used to be.
Used to be.
He's at Oxford now, isn't he? So, but I was only laughing at Christians who deny the authority of the Bible.
Be careful when you laugh, because some of your own people you're now quoting are from the very church you laughed about.
Sure. Don't misunderstand.
I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of a joke at your expense.
Yeah, you are. That's very naughty. naughty.
Very naughty, very naughty, very naughty.
Anyway, so if I understand,
Yes.
like Tom Wright,
Yes.
correctly, when Jesus says, no one is good apart from God alone, he's calling the rich young ruler to understand the quality of God. He's not denying his divinity. He's getting to him to understand what his understanding of the word good means.
So why did Matthew then feel embarrassed? You see, your explanation about Mark may or may not be true, but we still have the problem. We have Matthew changing the words of Jesus in very particular ways, such that the vast majority of scholars I've read say, well, Matthew's clearly very awkward, embarrassed about what's this statement in Mark, and he changes Jesus. By the way, this is not the only example. There are many examples where Matthew changes the words of Jesus to make it fit with later ideas. For example, on the law, Matthew teaches a Torah-observant Jesus, where the disciples of Jesus, and us by extension, are meant to obey the Jewish law. This is in direct contradiction to Paul, who said, for example, in Ephesians 2:15, that the law has been abolished. So we have a fundamental contradiction between Matthew and John in the Bible itself about just it has to live our lives.
Well, the reign of the law. Yeah. So what's the bit about the Matthew? Give me that bit again. I missed that bit about Matthew's understanding of the law. What were you saying? With contradicts with Paul's understanding of the law.
Right. The idea being that in Matthew's gospel, Jesus preaches in Matthew's gospel, the gospel writer presents Jesus as a Torah-observant Jew, right? But he also presents the disciples of Jesus as having to obey the law according to Jesus' teaching as well. So we see in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus saying, I've not come to abolish the law and the prophets. And he enjoins the disciples to obey the law, but with a renewed, deeper, not just the exterior law, but also the interior intention and motivation from the heart.
Someone fall from your heart.
Precisely. Precisely. But notice, I mean, that's all fine, because that's what Jews should do. And by the way, this is not new. The prophets said the same thing. Micah said the same thing, for example. I did others. But
Christians should do that as well.
No, but they don't, because Christians have abandoned the law. For example, do you like a nice ham sandwich occasionally?
Well, no, because Jesus declared all food to be
Oh, really?
clean.
Okay. Are you? Don't be personal.
No, I do have
I don't mean personal, but are you circumcised?
Well, that's a very. I'm not prepared to
Okay.
share that one.
You don't have to answer that question. You don't have to answer that question. It's a bit.
No cameras, please.
The reason you don't have to answer that question. The reason I'm asking that.
It's a bit delicate.
The reason I'm asking you that is I can tell you that your beloved Church of England, who you've already mentioned, all the main churches no longer require any male to be circumcised.
No.
And they also do not require people to abstain from pork, and they also do not enjoin a whole bunch of other laws which Jesus says you had to obey. So people sit very loosely on the actual teaching of Jesus in the Christian churches today.
Jesus was circumcised in Luke chapter 2 verse 21.
Circumcision is obligatory.
Yes, but I'm no scholar, but my understanding is that some Old Testament laws were fulfilled, and some we're still beholden to keep. However,
When you say you understand, according to who?
He's with them.
well, according to people like Tom Wright and
No. I meant is in the Bible. I know what Tom Wright thinks.
okay, yeah.
I'm talking about the authorities of the faith. Does Jesus in Matthew's Gospel say, you no longer have to circumcise your children, you no longer have to abstain from eating pork, you no longer have to obey the law? Did he say that? No, he didn't. He said obey the law. Did Paul say that? Yes. So here we have Christians today, in my view, are following the religion of Paul, the gospel of Paul. Muslims and Orthodox Jews, interestingly enough, are actually following a religion much closer to Jesus than Christians do today. This is one of the ironies of history, that Muslims now are better followers of Jesus in terms of their practice of the faith, in terms of their beliefs about Jesus, than Christians are today. It's a great irony of world history, in my view.
But I mean, just going back to the point about the food law.
Please, let's go back to food laws.
Didn't Jesus declare, all food to be?
Where did he say that? I can tell you. I know the answer. I'm just, I know. Well, I know too. I know exactly where he said that. But do you know where he said that?
Hang on a moment. Isn't it when
Yes, it is that incident. But where did he say?
Isn't it when the teachers of the law come up to him and say?
Yeah, but which gospel? Which gospel?
Well, isn't it
Because the same incident is there in 3 gospels.
Isn't it Matthew, Mark, and Luke?
Yes, but where you said that Jesus said you don't have to. Which gospel? I mean, I can tell you if you want.
Yeah, tell me.
Mark. Mark chapter 7.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Now, it's interesting.
Oh, yes, that's right. Because
it's interesting.
And then he went on about what comes out of the
In
heart
Mark
makes
chapter
man
7, Mark says, in parenthesis, it's not Jesus, by the way, Mark says this, thus he declared all foods clean. Now, if you look at Matthew's version, remember, Matthew changes Mark, he edits, deletes, improves, corrects, and frankly, well, no, I can give you dozens of examples off the top of my head. This is the second example. In Matthew's example, he deletes that very verse in Mark chapter 7, where he has Jesus, where Mark says, thus he declared all foods clean. And if you read Matthew's version on its own, you would never get the impression that he had declared food laws abrogated or nullified. You would never get that impression. You would in Mark, though. So what Matthew has done, he's corrected the erroneous Mark, which is clearly not scripture for him. It's now obsolete. It needs to be replaced by Matthew's own version. That's why he wrote at Matthew, to replace Mark. That's the whole point.
Exactly.
By the way, that thesis comes from Professor John Barth from the University of Oxford, who said that on my channel. It's a commercial break, by the way. If you want to hear him say that. So in Matthew's version, Jesus is not abrogating the law. He still requires the disciples of Jesus to follow the Torah prohibitions on eating pork. So when 99% of the world's Christians eat pork, they're in direct violation of the teachings of Jesus. When Muslims, as a matter of principle, abstain from pork, as we all do, they're upholding the law of God as endorsed by the Lord Jesus. Who is being a better disciple of Jesus? The Muslims or the Christians? That's my question for you.
It's very interesting. But I mean, wouldn't you say that Luke, though supported the Mark and the line?
Yeah, I agree. But Luke has a different view again from Matthew. The Gospels disagree with each other. So we have to say which is the most historically authentic of the very different contradictory portraits we have. Most scholars would say Matthew is actually accurate, historically accurate. But that's precisely the Gospel that Christians don't follow. But Muslims do follow. Muslims do follow it.
Yeah, but okay, well, that's all very interesting. I warrant you that. But wouldn't you agree that some of the laws, when Jesus comes, no camera. No camera. So no camera.
Three cameras there.
They're behind me though. They're behind me.
I'm pointing him.
Oh, that's okay then. But it seemed to be me. All right.
Please, you were saying.
Yeah, but would you agree that some of the Old Testament's laws are fulfilled by Jesus? So, for example,
what do you mean fulfilled, by the way?
Well, for example, the priesthood.
What do you mean by fulfilled?
Well, for example, the fact that there are no sacrifices anymore. So, we don't, Christians or Muslims, you don't perform any sacrifices, do you? Yeah. So both Christians and Muslims don't perform any sacrifices anymore.
Can I answer that? Can I answer that?
Yeah. But
right.
You know what I'm going to say. We think Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice.
Christians, in my view, Christians today don't follow the religion of Jesus. In my view, in many ways, not in all. In some ways they do, but mostly they don't. Let me explain why about the law and the sacrifices. So the temple in Jerusalem.
This is interesting. I mean, I'm listening.
And I respect the fact that you are listening, because in Speaker's Corner, often we don't listen to each other. I don't mean you and I mean people in general don't. But you are listening, and I'm doing my best to listen to you, and that's great. That's quite unusual, to be honest.
When you're not mocking me.
Sorry?
When you're not mocking me, you terrible man.
I was pulling your leg. I was pulling your leg about the Church of England. I thought it was too juicy a leg not to pull a bit.
All right, go on.
But I'm not mocking you about. I'm not mocking you about anything else.
No, I want to hear.
And I wouldn't do any more mocking. Okay. So as I say, Christians today don't tend to follow the religion of Jesus. Muslims are much closer. Let me explain about the sacrifices in the temple bit. So forgive me if you know a lot of you probably know a lot of that already. So in AD 60, as you know, the temple